Kim McCleary has been at the forefront of patient engagement for more than 30 years. She's a nationally recognized subject matter expert on patient-focused medical product development, patient-centered benefit risk assessment, and organizational change. Her passion for this work is rooted in personal experience, lived and as a family caregiver. To speed adoption of patient centricity, Kim established the KITH Collective, LLC. She has worked on several PFDD initiatives over the past 12 years. And so, with that, I want to introduce Kim, but I also just wanted to share about how valuable this information is. I've had a chance to be a part of patient listening sessions for another organization, but I can tell you it was one of the most enriching experiences. The FDA reached out and asked if I would share my face and words on a video, and I jumped at the opportunity. There's so much value in sharing our lived experience. And the FDA, the only way they're truly going to understand that is by hearing the aggregate of our voice, but also our individual voices. So it truly is an honor to introduce Kim, and I will let her take it away from here. Thank you.
Matt, thank you. I couldn't ask for a better intro and endorsement of the information that I'm so excited to share with all of you this evening. Let's go ahead and get started. Matt set us up really well. The topic for tonight is the Illuminate Hypersomnia initiative that is a patient-focused drug development initiative. And we're going to break down exactly what that PFDD means, and give you some background on sort of the traditional ways that patients have, over most of human history, been involved in research and the development of new medicines, and now how that has been changing over the last decade or so, and why this whole area has taken on so much momentum. Not only experiences like Matt's, but across the rare disease community and across the communities for more prevalent conditions as well. This has really been a game changer for a lot of individuals, organizations, and actually medicines. And then we'll take a look specifically at the Illuminate Hypersomnia initiative, and I'll break it all down for you and leave you with some ways you can get involved if you haven't already. And it was so nice to see some familiar faces as we've been making introductions with members of the IH community, so it's great to have you all here for this. All right, getting started. So PFDD means patient-focused drug development. And when I tell people sort of what I do for my professional work, they are often sort of mystified by the fact that patients haven't always been at the center of drug development. It's been a lot of focus on cool science or druggable targets or any number of other things that have really influenced the types of medicines, medical products, medical devices, gene therapies that have been developed, over the last century or so. And now we're in a new era. But to give you some background on why this is so important, it's often helpful to start with, well, what are the sort of general steps of how a new medicine is developed? So I have this sort of color-coded chart, and you may have seen something like this in other settings. I know many of the researchers in the sleep field often talk about drug development. But if we look over looking sort of left to right on this figure, on the left side is the basic research and drug discovery. And a lot of the things that happen in this orange and green area often occur in academic research centers, university labs. That's the kind of science that you read about in journals, and it doesn't really sort of connect to the human experience. Then when there are maybe, you see these white wispy lines that kind of move from left to right, and there are a whole lot of them on the left and very few of them on the right. As those lines start to converge, a company may pick up one or more of these potential medicines and take them into clinical trials. And that's what this blue section is. So in clinical trials, you're testing a specific intervention or medicine on humans, first, often in healthy controls, and then in patients with the condition that the medicine is intended to treat. And if you see down here at the bottom, you can see that the number of individuals enrolled in a clinical trial will increase over each phase. So phase 1 has fewer participants than phase 2, and phase 3 has the most. And in rare diseases, these numbers might be really, just a fraction of the numbers you see here. So you might just have a handful of people in a phase 1 study, 30 people in a phase 2 study, and 50 or 60 in a phase 3 study, depending on how many people have that condition. And then all of that evidence goes into an agency like the FDA, as Matt mentioned, or the European Medicines Agency over in Europe, or other health authorities around the globe. And they look at all of that evidence, and what they're looking for is there enough evidence that the benefit of the medication has been shown to outweigh any risks? And those risks might be immediate, sort of short-term risks that you would experience upon starting the medication, or they're things that can accrue and potentially occur over the long term. And they're really looking to make sure that there's enough evidence that they're convinced that the medicine is both safe and effective. And those are two different words. I could talk for a long time about those two words. There's a lot packed into them, but just know that that's sort of what most of us think about when we're prescribed something, that somebody has looked at this and it should be safe and effective for the patient population it's intended to treat. And I did want to note, because it's really important in conditions like idiopathic hypersomnia, that it's up to the sponsor, that's the drug company that develops the medicine, which patient population, or in some cases, more than one patient population, they're going to test their drug in. That's not a decision that's made by the FDA. But when a product is approved, the sponsor and the FDA sort of determine the label for that medication. If they find that it's safe and effective and that the benefits outweigh the risks, they're going to determine who is intended to be treated by that medication and any limitations that might be needed based on the evidence that was collected through all these prior steps. So often medications that are tested in adults before children, so that first label might restrict the use to adults. And if the company does additional studies later in children and provides that the data looks like it's safe and effective in children, the FDA may expand the label for use to show in that group. And this is important to know also, that once a medicine has been approved, prescribers, so your physician or nurse practitioner or PA, can use their best medical judgment to prescribe any approved medication to treat any medical condition. And I mention this again because we know that IH is treated using a variety of medications. As of today, there's only one approved medication with a label that indicates it's intended to treat people with IH, and that's Xywav, which is calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium oxybates. However, we know there are a lot of medications indicated for narcolepsy, sleep apnea, ADHD, and other conditions that are often used to address the symptoms of IH. So I sort of make that just to help you understand that, the medicines you take may or may not have been studied in people with IH, and you may or may not be able to gain access to them for that reason. It's all up to medical judgment at that point. And that's important in the setting of these PFDD meetings, because we really want to help the FDA and sponsors understand how members of the IH community are going about managing their condition and trying to get the best quality of life possible while new medicines are being developed. The other point I wanted to make is that this whole span of time that it takes to move from the left side of this figure to the right side to where we get to one approved medicine can take 10 to 15 years for a new medicine to be developed, and it can cost, somewhere around $2.5 billion. You can imagine, if you're a company that's going to invest that kind of time and that kind of money, you want to make the best decisions you can. And that's one of the reasons that patient-focused drug development has become so important, is they're recognizing that if they get all the way to this step and they've paid, they've invested $2.5 billion and spent 10 years developing something that doesn't really meet a need that a patient has, they're not going to be able to recover their investment. So that's where all of you come in. In the olden days, before patient-focused drug development happened, there were really very limited ways for patients to influence what kind of medicines were being developed. The first way was through organizations like HF and other patient advocacy organizations often raised money to fund some of that academic research that's happening in labs that are being conducted by doctors that also treat patients. And you go out and do walks and bike rides and lemonade stands and all kinds of ways to bring sort of grassroots fundraising into the lab and be patrons of research. In the setting of medicine development, when you get to these clinical trial points that are being done by mostly for-profit companies, sometimes they would reach out if they had either a clinical trial that was slow to recruit or patients were dropping out. And they'd say, hey, Hypersomnia Foundation, can't you help us reach some more patients and tell them about our clinical trial? But at that point, you're sort of, reacting to what their need is rather than helping inform, well, why is it that patients are dropping out? Or why is it that patients don't want to enroll in this study? It's really sort of more of a reactive phase. And then as a legacy of the HIV/AIDS movement, when HIV advocates really helped the FDA to understand that they had something to bring to the discussion about the new medications that were going to be treating HIV/AIDS, FDA began to include one patient representative on a committee that often will meet when the FDA is weighing out all that evidence I talked about to see if the patient, perspective would help them understand whether the benefits outweighed the risks of a medicine. But as you can imagine, one patient all the way at the end of that very lengthy, very expensive process can't do all that much to align whatever this drug is with what patients actually want. It's a little bit too little, too late at that point. So after a lot of experience recognizing there were gaps in that information that the FDA was using to make its decisions, in 2012, as a result of a lot of patient advocacy work, the FDA committed to what they called their Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative in 2012. And that was a commitment to hold 20 meetings. They actually increased it to 24 with about different diseases and to understand certain elements of the patient's lived experience that could help them make better decisions. In 2013, narcolepsy was one of the first diseases. It was actually the fourth meeting held in September of 2013. And I had the opportunity to work closely with Wake Up Narcolepsy and Julie Flygar to help the narcolepsy community prepare for that meeting. And it really was a fantastic meeting. It was the first of the rare disease meetings, and FDA was over the moon with how many people participated and what a robust conversation we had. And for many years of the meetings I went to, FDA used the UNIGHT narcolepsy images and meeting photos to really help explain what it was they were trying to do with patient communities. This meeting series was so popular and so helpful to FDA, but they recognized that they couldn't possibly address all the diseases that are out there. So in 2017, they created another opportunity for patient advocacy organizations to host these PFDD meetings in partnership with the FDA, and they call that externally led PFDD. So in some of our materials, you'll see we call it EL-PFDD, and that's what that means. It means that Sleep Consortium and a number of other partner organizations, including HF, are working together with the FDA to host this meeting, and we're following their template materials. And one of the early meetings under the EL-PFDD was held in 2018 on sleep apnea. And I worked with the American Sleep Apnea Association to host that meeting. And it was really an important meeting. It was the first one that brought medical devices, things like CPAP and BiPAP into the conversation, as well as medicines. And now there have been over 115 of these meetings. So it is quite a popular format, and there's quite a lot of experience with it out there. And I'm really proud to have been involved in a number of those meetings. This figure is quite busy. I just wanted to show it to say that this FDA PFDD initiative is just one of many efforts that are happening around the globe to make better use of patient perspectives and lived experience to help health authorities make better decisions, whether that's at the health technology assessment level or agencies like the UK's version of the NIH. There's just a lot of activity and opportunities for patients to inform really important decisions. So if we look at what's come out of this whole PFDD thing and why it's expanded from initially 20 meetings to now, almost 120 meetings, it really sort of proves the point that the FDA recognized and really embraced that patients have this unique ability to inform the clinical context to help them make regulatory decisions. And they also acknowledged that before this was created, there weren't many ways that they could understand this from the patient viewpoint. It often only occurred in the setting of when a product was being reviewed, and that's kind of a tense point. It's very, this new medicine is either going to live or die, sometimes by the kind of testimony that patients can give. And so they wanted to take the conversation outside of those really pivotal decisions and bring it into more of an objective format. The other thing that the FDA realized early on was that there was often a disconnect between what patients said were their chief complaints, and that's a term that gets used in medicine, the things that are most bothersome, most burdensome to patients, often were not the things that drug developers were focused on. They were focused on something, that was cool to them, or that they thought, or that they heard from doctors was important to patients, but they weren't actually using patients' own experience to identify what was going to be most meaningful. And so that's been a huge learning. They've also become very comfortable with the fact that patients want to be help. They want help in these processes, and they want to be part of this whole initiative. And that's both a cultural, influence of how our culture and society has changed over the past many years, but has really given voice through this PFDD initiative. And so I want to really, convey strongly that at this PFDD meeting, we go to a lot of conferences and meetings where the guys with the scientific degrees and all the long letters after their names and big long titles and university affiliations have the expert tags. But at this meeting, you guys, if we were in a ballroom, you would be the ones with the expert tags on your name tags. And I just can't drive that home enough. You don't have to be an expert in how to develop drugs. You just have to come with your own lived experience and know what's most important in your life. And then our job on the back end will be to take, this framework of how drugs get developed and layer on top of it the kinds of things that FDA has said are important to to understand about the lived experience. And you can see, if you think about these 4 buckets being the same sort of pathway to a new medicine, they've outlined these questions that you don't have to memorize. I'm very familiar with them, and that's what we're shaping this whole initiative to help answer, are the kinds of questions that we hear regularly from FDA and that we know sponsors developing new IH treatments are also interested in hearing about. So with that background, very generic to the whole PFDD, I'd love to share some specifics about the Illuminate Hypersomnia initiative. And there are 3 parts to it. There's the meeting that will be held on April 11th, a survey, and then a voice of the patient report. And we're going to go a bit out of order just because of the way the timeline has unfurled for this initiative, and talk about the survey first. So we launched the survey on February 6th, and it will be open until May 11th. So we're going to keep the survey open for a full month after the meeting in hopes of reaching as many people and getting as many responses as possible. We spent all fall working on this survey, and we had tremendous help from members of the community, individuals with lived experience, with clinical experience, with research experience, really helping us make sure that we had questions that were relevant to the lives of people with IH, and also in terms and framing and context that they would understand. So this is what the survey looks like if you go to see it on a computer. You can also take it on a mobile device, but I think our tester group has said it's much easier on the computer. So if you haven't taken it already, I strongly recommend taking it on the computer. It does have a save and return function because we know it's not easy to maintain, both the time commitment and the attention to get through a survey as comprehensive as this one. By way of a bit of a sneak peek, we have been astounded at the results so far. We just today crossed the 300 mark in terms of responses from the community. That is late breaking news. I hadn't even told Claire and Lindsay that yet. And it's awesome. We've had responses from the US and 14 other countries around the world, from people, a caregiver reporting on someone as young as 17 and up to age 83. 98% of respondents have been diagnosed with IH by a healthcare professional. And that was something that we were really concerned about at the beginning, is how would we know for sure that the people responding and participating in the survey had, IH. We know it's often difficult to get a diagnosis. We were also not sure, how much access to medical care people would have, but 92% of those who've responded so far take one or more prescription medications to manage their IH. So we are right in the sweet spot of who we wanted to hear from for the purposes of this survey. And I've included just two sort of points of data. We didn't want to give too much away and potentially bias other survey respondents as they're continuing to take the survey, but thought it was interesting just in terms of sleep duration. We know that is a big impact of IH, that almost 50% of the folks who've taken it so far are sleeping 10 or more hours per day. And in terms of how many of the hours a day they feel alert and focused, it's, more than 50% are saying that's less than 4 hours a day, and a quarter of people 0 to 2 hours a day. So this is a pretty severely impacted group of individuals, and we are learning so much from the early analysis of the data as the survey numbers continue to rise. So thanks to everyone who has participated in the survey, and I will pop up a link to it if some of you haven't had the chance yet to look at it and think about taking the survey. Sort of moving on from there, the PFDD meeting, which will be a virtual meeting held online, will happen on April 11th from 12 noon to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We are really excited about that. The time is getting closer and closer and closer, and we still have quite a lot of work to do to make sure this is as smooth as it can be. But we're excited about the progress we've made so far. As I mentioned, there have been 115 or so of these meetings, and FDA has really a very clear idea of what the format needs to be and what the questions are that they want to have answered. So we'll be following their template quite closely and customizing it to make sure that it addresses the key features of idiopathic hypersomnia. It starts out with a clinical overview that's quite short, actually, not like some of the scientific meetings you might go to. And that just gives the FDA reviewers and anyone else who doesn't have a strong understanding of IH a bit of background to sort of, give them context for what they will hear from community members. And to help us with that, we have Dr. Lynn Marie Trotty from Emory University giving that overview. Then the patients really take the stage. And there are two sessions, one dedicated to symptoms and daily impacts, and the other dedicated to current treatment options. And that's FDA's slide. And now I'll show you sort of how we're thinking about this. And some of this is still a work in progress. The format is pretty standard, but this is where we really want to paint the picture of what it's like to live with IH over a broad set of experiences and involving about 20 members of the community directly, and even more of you through other means. So to start off, there will be 4 or 5 presenters, each with a pre-recorded sort of 5-minute piece of remarks that are specific to a certain aspect of IH. And I have just some of the topics that we are focused on for this first part that, again, focuses on the symptoms of IH and how it impacts daily life. And so we're thinking about things like the long journey to diagnosis that sometimes complicates the picture, the classic symptoms of excessive daytime sleepiness and sleep inertia, sleep drunkenness, and just, all of the long hours of sleep. Also, this symptom burden related to brain fog and cognitive issues that people experience. We'll have someone speak to the impacts on daily living and the roles of parent, spouse that we go about in our daily life and how IH impacts those, and then also how it impacts school or work performance. And that will kind of be little snapshots from each of these people. And then we have a group of 4 to 5 individuals who will join live, and they'll have a discussion about what they've heard from this panel of presenters that in the prepared remarks. And we'll talk about some of those diagnostic challenges, how comorbidities fit in, the cumulative symptom impact and the consequences of that, how symptoms might change over time, things like stigma and shame, the impact on relationships and life aspirations. We've heard from a lot of people who end up needing to go on disability and what the greatest worries are when you're living with IH. So that's kind of how it gives you hopefully some ideas about how that conversation will take place. And in addition to those 4 to 5 discussion starters who will be live with Lindsay and me, we'll also have the ability to bring some of our survey data into the conversation. We'll be taking phone calls. You can chat us comments online and also send emails. So we really want this to be highly interactive with as many members of the community weighing in and contributing their experience as possible. After this session, we will move to current approaches to treatment. And again, we'll follow sort of the same format with 4 to 5 presenters who will have pre-recorded their remarks. And again, these are just some of the examples of things we might cover with these presentations. Somebody at the early stage of being treated and what that's like to go through sort of the trial and error process of looking for a medicine or regimen that might work. What the treatment of teens and kids is like, different from adults. Somebody who's found a modest treatment success and what that took. Someone with changing treatment needs over time that has sort of this whack-a-mole that we've heard so much about, where something works for a while and then stops working and you got to go back to the drawing board again, or you lose access to a medicine and have to find something else. And then finally, as Matthew said, what are the unmet needs? What are the treatment aspirations? What are the things that you most want relief from? And have a conversation about that. And then 4 to 5 other new discussion starters will join us, and we'll have a conversation again about those unmet needs, what meaningful improvement looks like, what are some of the downsides, side effects, and concerns that you're struggling with, what are some of the barriers to getting treated, what medications are being used off-label, and things like drug shortages I've been hearing a lot about in recent days. Lifestyle adjustments and other approaches. FDA has become very holistic in their understanding of the number of approaches that patients might use to get the best results that they can. And then finally, talking a bit about clinical trial experience and what participation in clinical trials might look like for the IH community. And again, we will bring in the survey data and phone calls and chats and emails. So I know it will be a very robust conversation and a lot to bring into our understanding. So just in terms of the participation, to highlight again, just a different way to look at this is over the course of the meeting, we'll sort of have these concentric circles where Lindsay and I will be the moderators, sort of keeping everything running smoothly and on time and taking all those comments from different participants. We'll have presenters and discussion starters who will know their roles ahead of time, and then bringing in the voices of community participants through the live stream and the survey and call-ins and web comments. And again, this is where the voices of the lived experience and the experts living with their condition come in. And then on this outer rim are the FDA staff, the sponsors, researchers, healthcare professionals, and maybe fellow advocates in other diseases that are thinking about hosting a PFDD meeting. And these folks will all be in listening mode only. We won't hear from them during the meeting, and that's because we want to keep the community front and center. So then, bringing this all together, we have the virtual meeting, the online survey, and we'll take all the information that we've collected and put that into what the FDA calls the voice of the patient report. And that will take us a few months to pull together and present in a really professional looking design and format. And that will be an evergreen resource, not only for the FDA and for the sponsors who are developing medicines, but also for the community. And often in these meetings, you know, a number of unmet needs arise that the community can work together on. And it can be a really powerful point of community building and sort of actualization of realizing you've got power and you've got the ability to accomplish things together in collaboration. And then once all of that has been done, we're hoping that the FDA and companies will take all that information and be able to answer some of these questions and maybe new ones that arise over the course of the conversation. So that's really our goal, is to sort of fill in all of these unanswered questions at this point with information from the community. And before I turn it back to Matthew and open up for questions, I did just want to acknowledge and thank the partnering organizations that have been so tremendous in helping us get the word out about this and spreading information about how to get involved, as well as the sponsors of the Illuminate Hypersomnia initiative that have made unrestricted educational grants to help us defray some of the costs. And with that, I can turn it over to you, Matthew.
Yeah, so we already have some questions here in the chat that I'm about to pass along to Kim, but I just wanted to remind everybody, please include your questions in the chat, and then I'm going to try to filter, you know, some of the biggest questions first, and then we can continue to try to figure out how much, depending on how much time Kim has, we can take it for maybe 10 minutes, perhaps longer. And then before we go into breakout sessions and can possibly do some really deep dives into some of the maybe more complicated questions. One question that hopped up, we've got the link for the survey in the chat. So thank you for making sure we got that out, Lindsay. One question that we have here is, if I've not been diagnosed, should I take the survey? So it sounds like someone's looking for a diagnosis or in that process. And so wanted to get your answer on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. We have an option for that question that's self-diagnosed or other, I think. So just, yeah, indicate what your status is. And we're really trying to be inclusive of everybody in this community. And we know it's not easy to go through the diagnostic process. And we definitely want to hear from you.
Yeah, and I'm grateful to hear that, because I know too that some of the diagnostic tools we have can be a little bit fickle in terms of producing an answer, and so there's a lot more concerns just outside of, you know, do you have the stamp, and even what does that stamp mean? One question here I think is really good. How are the presenters being selected for the PFDD?
So we are in the midst of this right now. We've heard from several hundred people who have asked to stay up to date with respect to the Illuminate Hypersomnia initiative. And there was on the, I think maybe the website link is up there. There's a place that says keep me informed. And some people were really great and wrote in a little bit about their story and their interests when they signed up for updates. So we have been reaching out and doing some introductory interviews with folks and getting to know members of the community and putting a storyboard together, as well as tapping into folks, obviously Claire and Lindsay, Diana, others who have, long-term roots in this community and know the community members really well. And I will have to say, we're finding a lot of people that hadn't previously been connected. So it's been a great opportunity to engage and to expand the IH community.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point too. There's so much value to adding new storytellers and getting to hear perspective from, a diverse population as well. Would there be a contact for someone if they were looking to share? Perhaps they didn't fill that out on the original application. What would be the best approach if someone was, really adamant about, that they want to try to participate in that aspect? So that wasn't included, but I figured it might be a decent follow up there.
Yeah.
I can drop an email into the chat. And I
Okay.
also see in the chat the discussion about the website. It is currently down for maintenance, for scheduled maintenance to sign up. So if you also want to email, if you're trying to get on it so that you can sign up for future information about the meeting, feel free to email the link I'm putting in now, and I'll make sure to resend that tomorrow, because I'm not sure why today had to be the day that we scheduled maintenance. It is.
Because it's Monday.
Yeah. So I got a great question here from Quinn. What's a good example of the impact the PFDD process had on influencing FDA decision making, in particular regarding narcolepsy? But I think broadly too, what has been some of the real impacts of the PFDDs on the FDA process?
Yeah, I'm glad you put it in the setting of narcolepsy, because I have a couple good examples of that. And, sometimes these PFDD initiatives take a little while to see the fruits of the labor, right? I showed that it takes 10 to 15 years to develop a new medicine. So you might not have sort of proof for a little while. But Quinn, to answer your question, there were a few things that came up in that narcolepsy meeting that even the most experienced clinicians had not heard before. And one of them was about the importance of brain fog. They just did not have as much understanding and awareness about how impactful that was in the lives of people with narcolepsy. That was a big aha moment for a lot of people. The other thing was sort of two aspects related to the use of sodium oxybate in treating narcolepsy. One was, the real feeling among people who have cardiovascular issues, high blood pressure, who have to really be vigilant about their sodium intake, and their doctors would not prescribe sodium oxybate out of a fear of, tipping them into a more serious condition with respect to their cardiovascular health. That actually was one of the things that led Jazz to develop a lower sodium version, the Xywav, for both narcolepsy and also, as I mentioned earlier, labeled for IH. And then the other thing that was heard in that meeting was just the challenge of getting up in the middle of the night to take a second dose of Xywav. And that's, a path that now there's an extended release form. So you can see how these insights from the patient community and where the pain points are in their lives can really be informative in terms of steps that a drug sponsor might take. So those are a couple of narcolepsy things that have been influenced.
Yeah. Kim, thank you so much for that. And on that topic of brain fog, we've had a couple of follow-up comments about brain fog. While the agenda hasn't been fully released, I believe Hypersomnia Foundation is looking to put a session on brain fog at the Beyond Sleepy event, and I think it is such an important topic. And you were very, very clear there, and I think it's worth reiterating that it does take time for these things to come to fruition in terms of like identifying a problem and then potentially identifying a solution and learning to understand what the patient community means when they refer to brain fog, I think is a first step. So, it's again, I think the fact that that's included, it made me smile when I was reading through it. It's the symptoms that are typically associated, and then we do need to understand more. Physicians need to, and patients need to be able to communicate that effectively. So, yeah, great to see that, and just wanted to open up. Let me see. How do you hope the initiative with the FDA translates to insurance companies and the patient experience? Is that something that is within the scope of this project? I know that's tricky for the FDA too, because they don't really set pricing and there's orphan drug exclusivity and it's a complex web, but I'm interested to hear your answer on that.
You are so right, Matthew. It is sort of beyond the FDA's mission to discuss either pricing issues or how insurance companies decide to set their coverage policies for different medications. And we have, certainly raised it in our conversations with the FDA representative that we work closely with, and they are very accustomed to these issues about access coming up in the setting of PFDD meetings. So we anticipate it will be a point that gets raised, but we won't spend as much time on that aspect as we do others. I will say with a lot of the communities that I've worked with, all of this information is very relevant to companies like United or Aetna or CMS. And while they aren't the chief audience for this particular meeting, there's no reason that once the Voice of the Patient report is available, it could be an advocacy initiative to go out and meet with some of the bigger companies, especially with the understanding of where patients are getting covered, and help to educate them about the needs of the IH community and why providing treatment may help save costs of car accidents or other things that can be quite costly, and help them understand sort of the value proposition for effective treatment to inform their decisions.
Yeah, I remember hearing a prominent behavioral sleep specialist talk about the impact of sleep deprivation on the GDP, and I know that that's been a helpful tool when you're talking to legislators. But I did want to point out too that the Hypersomnia Foundation does support legislative advocacy as well, and I think that's definitely the avenue to take when you're trying to make changes. You want to hit it at the source, and legislation certainly can take that the next step, albeit again a slow process. Does anybody else have any specific questions for Kim about this process? I think one thing that you did a great job of there, Kim, was just identifying that everybody on here is an expert in their own lived experience. And so if you have some anxiety about, does my perspective matter? And I think it's unequivocally yes, your perspective matters. It has value and it's needed in a process like this. But just wanted to thank you for your time and give everybody another minute or so. If there's a last second question that they want to shoot out there, please don't hesitate. And then we can jump into a little bit deeper conversation. Lindsay also put the email up for pfdd@sleepconsortium.com or .org. If there's a question on wanting to be participating in the panel presentation portion as well. Will survey data be available as it unfolds? Brian, I think she gave us a preview. Is there a date to have that survey data released, or is that going to be
it will be it'll be part of the Voice of the Patient report in some aspects. We also went through the process of getting the survey instrument and all of the communications we've been using reviewed by an institutional review board, an ethics board, so that the data can be published in peer-reviewed journals, because we know that is the best chance of getting doctors and researchers to be able to see it. So we will likely make use of some of the data at the meeting itself, and then it will be included in the Voice of the Patient report and potentially other what they call peer-reviewed publications in the medical literature also. So a good bang for the buck for the time you will spend responding to the survey.
No, I think that's a great point. We've got some sleep researchers who like to come and find the information here, but by and large, I think meeting them, where they are in the journals, I think is a great step. But good, quick question here too that I think needs to be clarified. But with how closely NT2 and IH are related, should an NT2 patient take the survey? I feel like I have an answer on this, but just wanted to throw that out there.
I'll let you answer that, Matt. You're better positioned for it than I am.
Oh, I was just, if you don't have an underlying IH diagnosis or you have a definitive NT2 diagnosis, I feel like that would mean that you would be falling more clearly under the NT2. I do know there's a lot of fluidity there, so I'll definitely kind of lean towards maybe Lindsay and Claire to just make a definitive statement. But for me, this would be a source of information to collect on people who are currently living with IH or looking towards an IH diagnosis. They have symptoms that are in line with that. That way it doesn't very close together.
Thank you so much, Kim, for coming and speaking with us all today. And for the rest of us, I'm going to move us into 2 separate breakout rooms. Again, the email, though, if anyone needs to get in touch or needs the website that is currently under maintenance, is in the chat. So feel free to send just a quick email saying that you would like a follow-up, and I will get back with you. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Kim.